It goes without saying that people who train every single day to fight tend to be quite scary individuals. Well, for the most part. And in this video, I want to highlight 5 fighters who I believe are the scariest in the sport of boxing. Fighters who just had that aura about them. And coming in at number 5 is one of the greatest middleweights of all time, Triple G, Gennady Golovkin. The Kazakh fighter ruled the middleweight division from 2015 to 2018 and was easily one of the most feared fighters of his generation. He possessed one of the best chins ever seen in the sport, having never been knocked out in his 45 fights long career, and he had a fearless style which, coupled with tremendous power, would result in 37 of his 42 wins coming by knockout. While on the surface, Golovkin doesn't look particularly scary, with this meme perfectly summing up him as a fighter. He's a very respectful, non-trash talking type of fighter, but his presence outside the ring is not what makes Golovkin scary. Once he entered the ring, he was spectacularly violent. His fights with Kell Brook and Matthew Macklin perfectly showcase the sheer brutality of Golovkin. At number 4, we have one of the 4 kings, the 4-weight world champion Roberto Duran. Duran is the definition of a fighter. Whether it's in the ring or the streets, he's always game. He had fearsomely powerful punches which gave him the nickname Hands of Stone, and he used that power to knock out 70 of his 119 opponents. His relentless pressure made him a nightmare to face, as he would force his opponents to fight at his pace, and his speed and reflexes allowed him to land his shots before his opponent was able to react. A lot of the danger from Duran came from his work on the inside, where he landed punishing hooks and uppercuts, which were thrown at lightning speed. Also, much like Golovkin, Duran had a world-class chin, which he used to great effect against some big punches over his career. He even inspired a man who we'll talk about later, spoiler alert, Mike Tyson, and it's easy to see why. Duran was a fearless warrior. He had a very aggressive style, using constant pressure to overwhelm his opponents. He also had solid technical ability with solid defense, which can often be overshadowed by his incredible offense, and he's widely considered the best lightweight to ever do it. In at number 3, we have one of the most feared hitters of his day, the G-Man, Gerald McClellan. McClellan's knockout power coupled with his seek and destroy style made him a terrifying prospect for anybody in his division. He was a student of the Kronk Gym and worked under the legendary Emanuel Stewart. And if you know anything about the Kronk style of fighting, you know they love to go for the knockout. And McClellan's formidable power resulted in him having one of the highest first round knockout ratios in the history of the sport, which is why his promoter Don King described him as a mini Mike Tyson. This would create an aura around McClellan that very few fighters are able to create, which would make him a very avoided fighter. He had great killer instinct and possessed fantastic physical attributes, and he was also a very fast and accurate puncher. Overall, he was a pretty terrifying prospect for anybody in the middleweight division. Staying with middleweight, we have one of McClellan's rivals, the Dark Destroyer Nigel Benn. I don't think there are many fighters in the history of the sport that wanted a knockout as much as Nigel Benn did. The 2-division world champion had violence on his mind from the opening bell. Just look at his face when he's doing his stare downs, just pure aggression. And he had that ruthless style to match. Every punch was thrown with vicious intent. And that ruthless style was on full display when Benn captured the WBO middleweight title against Iran Barkley in what was a 1-round war. He was also extremely tough and certainly wasn't afraid to face adversity, which he demonstrated well in his war with Gerald McClellan, where he managed to survive a beating where he was even sent outside the ring, and he eventually came back to stop McClellan in round 10. I think one of the scariest aspects of Benn as a fighter was that when you got him hurt, he would become even more dangerous. He would bite down on his gum shield and he'd want a war with you. A ridiculously entertaining and scary fighter in his prime. Number 1, you probably guessed it as I mentioned it earlier, but he had to be number 1 for me, and that is Iron Mike Tyson. Now I know it's a pretty generic answer to the scariest fighters in the sport, but any man who says he wants to push his opponent's nose bone into their brain is quite a scary individual, to be honest. Mike was terrifying inside and outside the ring, especially in the later part of his career, which saw him become even more unhinged, especially his ear-biting moment against Evander Holyfield, which is probably the most famous example. Mike's fighting style made him an absolute killer in the ring. He would throw brutal hooks and uppercuts which were thrown at lightning speed. He was just out there to punish his opponents. And I think what made Mike even scarier is that he would knock out guys much bigger than himself, as he was famously an undersized heavyweight. His speed, matched with incredible power, resulted in Mike having easily one of the best highlight reels in the sport. A term used a lot nowadays in fighting is aura, and nobody had a stronger aura than Mike in the heavyweight division at the time. Just look at Mike when he left prison. He was an absolute animal. Just from his ring walk alone, he looked the part, coming out in his iconic all-black shorts without a robe, which was a throwback to old-school fighters. His pre-fight stare-downs were also equally iconic, and probably the most intimidating, as you could just see the bad intentions Mike had for his opponent just by his eyes alone. And that's for me why Mike Tyson is number one. But let me know what your list is in the comments below. Is there any fighters that I missed? I'm sure there's just so many that I could include here. And as always, thanks very much for watching.